OnePlus. The company known for creating the flagship killer back in 2014 and disrupting the mobile market by giving us top-of-the-line specs in an affordable package is not the same company anymore. Now, of course, that company's changed, especially in 7 years, which is how long OnePlus has been alive for, but I am a bit worried about the direction that OnePlus is heading towards. So, without any further ado, here are my thoughts on OnePlus as a company. Okay, so first things first, I just want to say that I'm a big fan of OnePlus, both in terms of their brand as well as in terms of their products. I love their aesthetics, their minimalism, and also how well they treat their community, with loads of in-person events, although not as much since the start of the pandemic, and many different prizes and competitions for their fans. I absolutely love how insanely fast their phones charge, and just how clean the UI is. They have 3 lines of phones now, with multiple models in each line, which is usually a sign that a business is doing well. However, I do think that OnePlus is actually in a bit of a tough spot at the moment, not just because their co-founder left to start another company, but also because they're now officially merged with Oppo. And on top of that, Oxygen OS, their Android skin, will now merge with Oppo's Color OS skin. And there's a lot of other changes inside the company too, with the Indian team having a massive reshuffle and just a ton of employees leaving or even being kicked out because of internal restructuring. So what is actually happening? Well, I think that the biggest thing that happened to OnePlus was Pei leaving. In case you don't know, Pei was the founder of OnePlus. It seems like a lot of the design aesthetics, the minimalism, the design language overall, and ideas came from Carl, who approached his then manager at Oppo, Pei Leaving, to start OnePlus, which they did back in 2014. Pei Leaving had a ton of connections at Oppo, so when OnePlus was founded, it used Oppo's manufacturing facilities, and this was also the reason why a lot of their phones looked like rebranded Oppo phones. In fact, Oppo is the majority shareholder in OnePlus and has been from the very start, which technically means that OnePlus has always been owned by Oppo. And OnePlus's parent company is BBK, who owns Oppo, Vivo, and Realme. I was lucky enough to meet both Pei and Pei Leaving at OnePlus events in the past, and they were both great guys, but unfortunately, over the last few years, it is said that there were some conflicts between Pei and Pei Leaving, which divided the team quite heavily. We don't know what these debates were, but I can only assume that they were caused by the fact that Oppo wanted to be even more involved in OnePlus, which Pei was very much against. This was something that I will be expanding more throughout this video. Now, the last big project that Pei was involved in was the original OnePlus Nord, which seemed to have been fully developed by Pei and Akis Evangelidis, who was the head of communications and vice president of OnePlus France at that time, and he has been on stage a number of times at the events, some of which I have actually been present to. In the OnePlus Nord launch documentary, Carl and Akis were talking about how many sleepless nights they've had and how difficult it was for them to create the Nord in such a short amount of time. And the Nord ended up being a success and also one of OnePlus's most successful products of all time, and that was because it had the same ideas as the original OnePlus One. A very affordable price point, great performance, and a decent enough camera. Yes, the original OnePlus was back. However, just over a month after the Nord's launch, Pei left OnePlus entirely to start nothing. And by nothing I mean something, which was nothing, his own company. That you've probably all heard of already. Now, I had my suspicions that some of the team at OnePlus left as well to actually join Carl in his new company, Nothing. And it seems like Akis Evangelidis, at least, he has joined Nothing too as a co-founder and the head of marketing. And you'll see why this matters in just a second. Obviously, when the founder leaves the company, it is pretty bad for that company, as it doesn't just heavily demotivate a team, but it also shows that the initial idea, the dream that Carl had for OnePlus, was no longer there, or at least it was no longer achievable. Luckily, I already see that a lot of the original branding ideas and decisions at Carl's new company, ideas such as a minimalistic design, very clean yet aggressive marketing, and a lot of hype for their first product, which also has a very competitive price point, a lot of these ideas were also things that OnePlus had when it first started. Pretty sure that most of these were either Carl's ideas or at least ideas of his inner circle, which are now present at his new company, Nothing, which I think is great. But unfortunately, like I said before, a lot of these ideas were what made OnePlus OnePlus. Now, my second worry regarding OnePlus is the merger with Oppo. So, like I said, OnePlus has technically always been owned by Oppo since the very start. And because of this, a lot of OnePlus phones over the years were just rebranded Oppo phones. The OnePlus One was a rebranded Oppo Find 7a. The OnePlus X was a rebranded Oppo A30. The OnePlus 3T was a rebranded Oppo R9 Plus. The OnePlus 5 was a rebranded Oppo R11. The 5T was a rebranded Oppo R11s, and I could just go on and on and on. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all of OnePlus's phones have been rebrands. OnePlus has indeed had a few unique designs of their own, with the most iconic ones being the OnePlus 7 Pro and the OnePlus 9 Pro. OnePlus has always denied that they're owned by Oppo, which was always quite odd as this was already public information. But the fact that they've now officially announced that OnePlus will become a sub-brand of Oppo is what's worrying me even more. If OnePlus has had so many rebranded Oppo phones in their lineup already, then surely this will get even more evident in the future, given that they're now officially the same company. From my understanding, this was the main reason why Carl left. He just couldn't do what he wanted, as everything had to go through Oppo, something that became more and more evident in the later years with the whole design recycle. Fun fact, during an interview with The Verge about his new company Nothing, Carl Pei even said that Nothing won't just relabel something else's products. It is very likely that this was a dig at OnePlus and what Oppo was pushing them to do. And the fact that OnePlus is now officially part of Oppo would likely result in even more design recycles and even less of a brand identity for OnePlus. Not only that, but it seems like OnePlus's Oxygen OS skin would now be merged with Oppo's Color OS. Oxygen OS is still set to retain the same look as it has now, but it will share the same codebase as Color OS in order to be able to push out updates quicker. So that's great in terms of updates and support, but it also means that when users request a specific feature to OnePlus, which the OnePlus community usually does on the forums, instead of OnePlus being able to quickly implement it, that might take a while now, as it would have to go through Oppo first. Okay, now aside from the Oppoification of OnePlus, my next concern is when it comes to OnePlus's current lineup, which used to be very simple when they first started, as they only had one product, the OnePlus One, but then the following year, they bumped that to 2 with the OnePlus X. And now, in 2021, we are at a point where OnePlus is selling 10 phones. 10. And I know, that's nowhere near as much as Oppo or Samsung, or not even to mention Xiaomi, who almost releases a new phone every single week. But if we are to compare the current OnePlus to the old OnePlus, you cannot argue with the fact that the lineup is very confusing, especially for new customers. Even if you don't mind the number of phones on sale right now, their naming scheme and the differences between them can be very confusing to a lot of people. Their phone page is organized in what appears to be from the least powerful to the most powerful order. But then you realize that, oh wait, the Nord 2 is on top, so it cannot be that. It must be based on release date. But then you realize that the Nord N100 was released back in October 2020, which was after the OnePlus 8, which is higher up in the list. So it's not based on release date either. The organization of this list doesn't seem to follow any particular rule. And then let's take a look at the names. We have the OnePlus 8, the OnePlus 8 Pro, and the 8T. So you would think that the 8T is better than the 8 Pro just by looking at this list because it's ahead of it, but in fact it's not. And then when it comes to the Nord, I did think that Nord was actually a great name, but then OnePlus decided to muddy that name shortly after Carl Pei left by releasing the Nord N10 and the Nord N100. You would think that the Nord N100 is better than the N10 as it has a higher number, but in fact, it is actually the other way around, with the Nord N10 being better than the Nord N100. Not only that, but we also have the Nord CE 5G, which is a weaker version of the original Nord, a bit better than the Nord N10. And then literally a month after they released the Nord CE, they released the Nord 2, which is actually called the Nord 2 5G. And don't get me wrong, I think that the Nord 2 is a great phone actually. It ticks all the boxes that the average consumer would ever want in a phone, and even more than that. It's just that OnePlus's lineup is incredibly confusing at the moment. Even for me, and I'm a reviewer, imagine someone who is just trying to buy their first OnePlus phone. That person would be completely lost. So yeah, not a great path for a company that was priding themselves in simplicity. But luckily, Carl Pei's new company, Nothing, is just that. They only have one product, the Ear 1, and like I said before, everything that Nothing does seems to follow in the same footsteps of what OnePlus used to be. And finally, my biggest concern when it comes to OnePlus are the cameras. The camera has been the #1 issue with OnePlus phones since the OnePlus One. Luckily, OnePlus is fully aware of this, and they are indeed constantly working to improve their cameras. Like, they massively upgraded the camera hardware starting with the OnePlus 7 Pro, and we're at a point now where the OnePlus 9 Pro actually has a larger sensor on both the main module and the ultra-wide than the iPhone 12 Pro Max. But the main issue is still image processing. There are many cases where the processing just doesn't work quite right, and you end up with a photo that looks like a painting. And whilst OnePlus's image processing can actually be better than the S21 Ultra in some cases, a lot of the times it is a hit and miss, so it's just not reliable enough. Which is why they should really work on improving it. Maybe even get some inspiration from Google's own camera app, or maybe even start a partnership with Google in this regard, as the camera hardware is finally here, but the camera software is unfortunately still lacking. Okay, so in the end, OnePlus is definitely going through some hard times. A lot of their staff leaving, not just because of the pandemic, but also because of the whole merger with Oppo. Of course, Pei leaving is a massive hit to the company as well, and I just hope that they can find their true north once again, as I do love their products, I think they're great, and I hope that OnePlus just doesn't end up like LG, HTC, and many others who were once great, but unfortunately made the wrong choices and ultimately failed as a smartphone manufacturer. But yeah, let me know in the comments your thoughts. What do you guys think of OnePlus? Are you happy with their choices so far? And what improvements would you guys want to see? Let me know in the comments, and definitely subscribe if you want to see more interesting topics like this one hopefully was. I'm Daniel, this has been ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.